welcome to the Casual Cinecast, powered by Cinelinx. My name is Chris, and with me as always is Mike. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm always interested in knowing how you're doing, and the fact that you're doing well is a balm to my ears. And Justin is also here. How are you doing?
Much better now that you made that joke. That really made me laugh. Many of your jokes do.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's worth it if 1 out of 10 hit. So, but you got to go through the other 9 to get to that one.
Yeah, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take.
Yeah, exactly.
Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott.
My jokes are a lot like shotgun pellets. Something's going to hit at some point, but there's a lot of them that don't. So,
and they don't have a lot of range.
They don't go very far, yes.
And before moving into our Casually Criterion review, we will be talking about all the upcoming Criterion announcements for May of 2019. Then we'll be doing a review for The Princess Bride, directed by Rob Reiner, spine number 948 in the Criterion Collection.
Yeah, and if you want to vote on the polls to pick our next Criterion film, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Casual Cinecast. If you want to send us questions, topics, you can do that there, or you can also email us at casualcinemedia@gmail.com. And then, of course, as always, if you like the show, even if you don't like it, who cares? Go to iTunes, give us a 5-star review, let us know what you think of the show, and, of course, subscribe to it as well as on whatever podcast platform you listen to us on.
Absolutely, and stay tuned after the review because we will be picking the options for our next Casually Criterion. So we will be putting out a poll on social media after this episode, and from there you can vote on which film we are going to review next month on our Casually Criterion episode.
Yeah, this is my favorite time of the month. It's poll time.
So, let's get started. What do you guys say we move into the May announcements?
Let's go.
You on the mark!
All right, Justin, kick us off.
All right, so first up on May 7th, we have The Heiress, directed by William Wyler. And then on May 14th, we have Funny Games by Michael Haneke.
I assume this is the not American version, right?
Correct.
All right, and then also on May 14th, we have House of Games by David Mamet. And on May 21st, we have Let the Sunshine In, directed by Claire Denis.
Right, and then on May 28th, we have One Sing, The Other Doesn't by Agnes Varda, and then we have a fairly popular one by David Lynch, Blue Velvet, on May 28th as well.
Yeah, that's the big one that everyone was freaking out about, and I guess we're just going to continue to get David Lynch films, so it's inevitable.
As I'm looking at the covers, though, this is not a very good Criterion cover for Blue Velvet.
Right, it's just Blue Velvet.
Yeah, like I'm disappointed. I feel like some of the fan-made trailers, or not fan-made trailers, like the fan-made artwork you see on Reddit and stuff like that. You know, like I feel like I've seen a better fan-made Criterion cover than this one.
Yeah, I think that you're not alone in that. From what I've seen on the forums and Reddit and stuff like that, I think people are pretty underwhelmed by the artwork. It may be one of the ones that changed, like the Tree of Life cover art changed.
Yeah, this might be the worst Criterion cover I've ever seen.
Whoa.
Ooh, shots fired.
I mean, can you name a worse one off the top of your head?
I don't know about a current one. I've seen some pretty bad ones from like the early DVD days that I wasn't a big fan of.
Like a screenshot from the movie.
Right. Like I remember not being into like the Seventh Seal DVD art of like the original release. The new one is fantastic artwork.
I feel like this is up there with that. I would prefer a screenshot from the movie.
Yeah.
Which this might be, I guess, but this is just a terrible cover. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm spending way longer on talking about this than I anticipated. I love Blue Velvet, so doesn't mean I'm not excited.
It's a fantastic movie, and the special features, at least I really enjoyed the ones that were on the Mulholland Drive disc. Interviews with David Lynch and Naomi Watts and whatnot. So I look forward to this one too, and I hope this means that we'll get eventually some stuff like Lost Highway and other David Lynch films. Inland Empire, maybe. I'd love to hear some special features on. Yeah. I'd love to hear some special features on like what the heck is going on in Inland Empire, maybe. or some sort of analysis.
I don't think you ever will, because I think David Lynch is notorious for not giving you any kind of analysis whatsoever. And like what he does give you is like a red herring.
Yeah. Well, maybe they can bring on other people
Like
who are smarter
Yeah.
than me.
That's true. But do you remember that like when Mulholland Drive came out on DVD, there was like that little booklet in there that was like the 5 clues or the 10 clues to understanding Mulholland Drive.
Right. Yeah.
And it was basically just like David Lynch trolling us.
Yes. Yeah.
I've actually not seen Blue Velvet, so I'm excited for it to come out and to watch it on a pristine edition.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to look forward to a new poll. We'll just do a David Lynch poll or something.
Yeah. Have you seen Wild at Heart?
I haven't. I'm actually.
Have you seen Eraserhead?
Woefully behind on my David Lynch.
Should I stop
watching.
asking you the individual movies then?
Yeah, I'm woefully behind, Mike. What do you want from me?
Well, it's
Okay,
interesting
I'm
because
sorry.
I remember you being the driving point in both Mike and myself watching Inland Empire, I think.
Yeah, I really loved Inland Empire. But for
Okay.
whatever reason, I never really went back to his old stuff. Like once I discovered him. I mean, I watched Mulholland Drive in the theater. It's just sometimes they can be a little challenging, and when you sit down, you're not exactly like after a hard day's work, you're not looking forward to a challenging movie. You just kind of want to turn your brain off. So maybe that's my excuse. But
Yeah. Well, they've released funny games for you then.
right, which
Yeah.
is the feel good movie. Actually, I have a story about funny games, and
Are you going to tell it?
I am about to tell it. So sit back, pop some popcorn. I just randomly picked funny games up at Blockbuster one time. I had no idea what it was, and it blew me away. Like in several, like it was just once the character turns and talks to the camera, you're like, what is happening? This is unlike any film I've seen, and this is like me right out of high school watching it, and it was pretty awesome. It was a good experience.
I also have a funny games story involving you. I remember whenever I was working with you, and I remember that's irrelevant. But you and I were watching a movie in a movie theater in the Magnolia movie theater in Dallas, Texas, and I remember a trailer came on for the American remake of Funny Games, and it starts off with like a aerial shot of a car, and a family is like singing and like driving down the road. And I think within 5 seconds, you were sitting next to me. And I had never seen the original Funny Games, so I didn't know what I was watching. I was just watching this trailer. But you recognized what it was probably about 10 seconds into the trailer. And I remember you made a noise and shifted in your seat. And I remember being like, what reaction was this? And then I remember afterwards you told me, like, I think that's a remake of, like, this crazy movie I saw one time that I've never forgotten, and you told me who the director was, and we found out it was like the same director and the same everything. But I remember the moment you found out about the remake, there was like a visible reaction in the theater.
I was traumatized by it when I first watched
Yeah,
it.
you were just like, oh my God.
Well, why are they doing this?
Yeah.
That's funny. And of course, I don't remember if you were there, Chris, or not, but I know Mike and we went and saw the remake in that same theater when it did come out.
Yeah, I was there.
Okay.
I don't remember. Maybe Mike saw it twice. I don't know that any of this is relevant necessarily, but I remember seeing it with Mike, and there's a girl. And I think it was just the three of us, though.
Well, so that time that we saw the remake is the only version of Funny Games that I've seen. So I've actually not seen the original version, which is the one that Criterion's releasing. So, this gives me an excuse to go revisit it. For a while, I think people kind of told me that it's so similar that I don't necessarily need to go watch it, but I would still like to.
Yeah, I've seen both of them. I would say that hands down the American version is filmed better. Like, it just looks better production-wise. Like,
Sure.
The house looks fancier. Like, the clothes are like there's more white in the frame. You know what I mean? Like, you can just tell, like, he's more in charge of, like, the art direction of the movie.
Yeah.
Probably resulting from a larger budget. But that's pretty minor. The shots are all pretty much exactly the same, from what I remember.
Right. I think there's like differences like on what's playing on the TV and like what he's calling out. Like NASCAR was big at the time when he released it. So NASCAR's playing on the TV, so he's commenting on excess or whatever, So that's kind of the differences there.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Haneke makes usually pretty like heady movies, right? Where you have to like bring a lot to the table. He makes a lot of good ones though. Have you guys ever seen, this is completely off topic, but just real quick, have you guys ever seen The White Ribbon?
Yeah, definitely.
I have not.
Yeah. I love that movie. That movie is so good.
Yes, gorgeous black and white cinematography.
Yeah, indeed. I haven't seen any of these other movies that are being released. Have you guys seen any of these?
I've seen House of Games a very long time ago during my David Mamet phase.
I've heard good things about it. One of the guys I went to film school with really liked David Mamet and really liked this film. And I've seen the cover art around forever because it's been released on DVD before. This is a Blu-ray upgrade. And this is the first time looking at the artwork that I've noticed that the shadow says David Mamet and not just House of Games.
Right.
So, which makes me like the artwork more.
Cool.
I think that's kind of cool.
I want to get Spanish Prisoners. Have you guys ever seen The Spanish Prisoner with Steve Martin? It's a David Mamet film.
No. I love Steve Martin, though.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and the acting seems really stilted when you first start watching it, because of the dialogue and the way they're talking. But then at some point, it's like watching Shakespeare too, it's different kind of rhythm, and then once you get into it, it's really good, and you're following the story. I like The Spanish Prisoner.
Cool.
The only other one of real note to me is the Agnes Varda film. And I think it's just of note to me because I've always wanted to watch more Agnes Varda, and I haven't. I've only seen Cleo from 5 to 7, which I watched with you, Mike.
Yep, and that's where I got my Twitter handle name.
Yeah, exactly. And we both really like that one. So I've always wanted to see more, and I just haven't. So this is kind of just making one more of her films available to me.
Yeah. The one film I have seen by Agnes Varda, I absolutely loved. Like you said, Cleo from 5 to 7. I think that movie's wonderful. So any chance I get to watch more Agnes Varda, who I've always heard wonderful things about, I'll take it.
Yeah. Did any of you guys have High Life as your most anticipated films of 2019?
No, but I remember reading up on it, and it did pique my interest, but it did not quite make my list.
Yeah, well, the tie-in is that Claire Denis also directed Let the Sunshine In. So have you guys seen Let the Sunshine In?
I have not, no.
Oh.
No.
Well, maybe that's a way to catch up to see if we'll like High Life.
Looking at her filmography right now, I've seen White Material, and that might be it. Yeah, that's all that's standing out for me right now. Oh, Chocolat.
Oh, did she do Chocolat?
Yeah.
It's chocolate, you're not French. That's a line from I Love You, Man. You're welcome.
But this is the 1988 version, not the...
not the remake with Johnny Depp?
Yeah, not the version that you're thinking of.
Okay, well then you can pronounce it French if you want.
Yeah, there you go. Boom.
Cool. All right, so does anybody have anything else on these new release films?
No, that does it for me.
All right.
Yeah, I'm good. More fodder for the polls, so...
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so are we ready to go ahead and move into our review of The Princess Bride?
As you wish.
How long have you been working on that one?
Forever.
That's the reason you started the podcast. You're like, I'm going to start the podcast so that I can one day do Princess Bride and say as you wish.
Well, I wanted to make sure I got it out before you did because I thought you might do it.
Yeah.
I was almost there. Yeah.
There's a race to it.
I know who you are. Your cruelty reveals everything. You're the dread pirate Roberts. Admit it.
With pride. What can I do for you?
You can die slowly, cut into 1,000 pieces.
Hardly complimentary, Your Highness. Why loose your venom on me?
You killed my love.
It's possible. I kill a lot of people. Who was this love of yours? Another prince like this one? Ugly, rich, and scabby?
No. A farm boy. Poor. Poor and perfect.
Okay, so The Princess Bride, directed by Rob Reiner, written by William Goldman, starring Robin Wright, Carrie Eulis?
Elvis? I don't know.
Elvis? Anyway, Mandy Patinkin, Wallace Shawn, and Andre the Giant. The IMDb synopsis says, while homesick in bed, a young boy's grandfather reads him a story of the farm boy turned pirate who encounters numerous obstacles, enemies, and allies in his quest to be reunited with his love.
Lovely synopsis.
Indeed. Also kind of bummed out that Peter Falk didn't make the top build.
There's so many people in this movie, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, that's true.
That deserve accolade and deserve to be listed among the people in it. And, we'd be here all day, probably.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so who wants to go first with their thoughts on The Princess Bride?
I'll do it. So I had not seen this movie since I was relatively young. It's been probably 15 years, maybe more, since I've really sat down to watch it. I remember liking it quite a bit when I was younger, but it was never really in heavy rotation in my household. It's never been a movie that I've thought about a whole lot or remembered like a whole lot of people have. I like plenty of other William Goldman movies, quite a bit, actually, in the years since I've seen this movie. So I was not upset in the least when this won our Casually Criterion poll for February, even if it did go up against and win over two, dare I say, better movies. Anyways, that said, this movie is a pure joy, plain and simple. It is paced well. There aren't any scenes that drag the movie down. The entire cast is a delight. It's quotable. And even to this day, 20-something years later, almost 30 years later, it remains unique. So I understand completely why people have great affection for this movie. It's a fun, breezy, can't be more than 90 minutes long.
I think it's an hour 40, actually.
Yeah, maybe it doesn't feel like it. It feels like 80 minutes. It's a breeze.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
I don't know that there's much else to it than that, but I think that's plenty. That's enough.
Yeah, that's definitely sometimes enough. An hour and 38 to be exact, by the way.
Nice.
How many seconds?
It doesn't say. Google's not that precise.
Yeah, so my thoughts are... So I'm going to rewind just a bit. So whenever we do these polls, it's so fun and exciting to see what will win and getting to choose a movie. But often after watching the movie and when I sit down to think about what I'm going to say on the podcast, I'm often faced with the daunting task of talking about a movie that has been talked about quite a bit before, right? But what I will say is, although it's a challenge, but I love talking. I've got you two here because oftentimes our conversation ends up going in new and surprising places that I haven't heard before. So, yeah, that's often daunting, but it's so enjoyable to have this conversation. But The Princess Bride, like you said, Mike, is a pure joy to watch. It's so much fun. Like you said, all the side characters are completely enjoyable and do such a great job of keeping the momentum going, and there aren't any side characters, like you said, that drag the plot down. From Andre the Giant, Mandy Patinkin, and Wallace Shawn, I could watch the first half of this movie all day, and I think those three really do a great job of propelling the movie forward and making it quotable, like you said, Mike. The framing device is the thing I think that is unique. It's not necessarily unique, but it's a thing that The Princess Bride gets a lot of credit for. And I love the framing device because then we get Peter Falk and we get Fred Savage. And I think that adds an extra layer of sweetness or of pure joy. And I think it's a thing that has stayed with us, like Darth Vader being Luke's father and stuff like that in our pop culture. Even to go as far as the PG-13 remake of Deadpool mocked it or did a send-up of it just this year. So I think that's really cool. And then watching this film again, I was really surprised by some of the shots and how good they were because that's not what I remembered about The Princess Bride when I watched it before. I think that there's some really good shots in here.
There's some good sword fighting, too.
Yeah. It's fantastic sword fighting. It's so good.
Well done, yeah. I'm so glad that this has a Criterion release, and it deserves it. I think this is a classic film. I think oftentimes we think because a movie's made in our lifetime or that it doesn't necessarily deserve it, but this one is going to be around for a long time, and I'm glad I got to watch it again. So thank you, Justin, for that. And I would like to know what your thoughts are, Justin.
Yeah, so this was my choice on the poll, and I want to say that I picked it for the poll about maybe a week after I watched it. because not for the first time, but I watched it I don't even know how many times I've seen this film, but I got the Criterion Blu-ray, so I watched it again, and that's why I guess why it was fresh on my mind, so I chose it. So I think that says something about my enjoyment of the film, is that I'm so ready to watch it again, so quickly after watching it. But the first time I saw The Princess Bride was in middle school. It was in a class, some teacher showed it to us, right? And much like Fred Savage in the bed when his grandfather says he's going to read him The Princess Bride, I was not very excited about it. I wasn't interested in something called The Princess Bride as a middle school aged boy. But to my surprise, then I really enjoyed it. And personally, I'm not really sure if I watched it again between then and like my early 20s, because I don't remember a time of where I specifically watched it, but I knew all of the parts. I knew a lot of the quotes just from like pop culture and seeing them around. And I always remembered the film very fondly. So when I watched it again, sometime in my 20s, I kind of worried that it would be too much of like a kid's movie or,
right,
too tame maybe or too childish. But I think I'm absolutely wrong to be nervous about that. And even watching it again now, like in my 30s, it's such a fantastic film. It's so wonderful and charming. And it's, as you said, Chris, like it's one of the most watchable films, like in terms of like pace and being hooked into the movie. I could watch this movie over and over again and like not get bored just because it moves along, and particularly the first half, like you said, Chris, that's so good. That's when we get the sword fight and all the inconceivable stuff. I think the script is the most quotable script maybe of all time. I'd like to hear you guys' opinion on that.
Oh man, it would be hard. Like maybe some Mel Brooks movies that I hear quoted quite a bit, but those kind of grow out of fashion as the time goes on. And I think Princess Bride still remains very much in fashion.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I'm thinking maybe like Buster Keaton or early Charlie Chaplin.
Oh yeah, those are super
very
quotable.
Yeah. That's a good point.
No, I don't know. I won't back you up and say that I agree that it's the most quotable ever, but I see your point.
Yeah, I guess in the sense that it has the most quotes.
Yeah.
Maybe. At least like numerically. But
I think it... Oh.
Go ahead.
Just real quick, I think it's a movie that if you haven't watched like into your 20s, like maybe you're 25 or something, you watch it for the first time and you're like, oh, you get all the pop culture references that you've seen as you've grown up, or that your friends have quoted. You're like, so you already almost know the film from all the pop culture references and friends and stuff.
Definitely. But to move on from there, as you guys said, all the performances are spot on, and I think all of the characters are played in such a way that they seem so perfectly cast, and like you can't imagine anybody else playing any of these characters. At least I can't. Like they just fit the part so well. And as far as like the cinematography, I think it's not the most immaculate or uniquely shot movie, but the camera work and the shots tell the story so perfectly and like stay out of the way of the film and just let the story unfold. And I always appreciate that. And yeah, like I want to talk a little bit more about the framework later, Chris, but you've mentioned that. I think that this is a film that I wouldn't often list as like one of the greatest films of all time or like one of my personal favorite films, if I'm like being a very intellectual about it, but I think it might belong in that conversation of the greatest films of all time, like in a very universal sense, because it's a film that everyone likes, right? Like I don't know anybody who's seen the film who just like doesn't like it. I'm sure those people are out there.
Right. It's like the first Star Wars or like The Godfather. Like anyone who's actually sat down to watch it kind of has to just like reckon with how good it is for what it is doing.
Yeah, exactly. And my examples for films would have been like Jurassic Park or Singing in the Rain or maybe even It's a Wonderful Life. Like these films that you can't just help but enjoy. Like It's impossible. So yeah, that's where I stand. Obviously, I really love this film a lot. So yeah.
Yeah, I can see why this movie at the time would have been like really hard to market. Which sort of led to it being discovered later on VHS and having like that cult revival. But even now, I feel like it would be hard to market. Like I think of movies in a similar vein to this one that have come out since then and kind of have met similar fates, only they weren't lucky enough to be rediscovered and beloved on home video. And I'm thinking of like Stardust. Right? Like I think Stardust is just as charming as this movie. Maybe not quite as much, but like I think Stardust is wonderful. And in the same vein as this movie, and should be, you know, in the pantheon of like classic family movies that are beloved by everyone because it's just a fun sit. But you know, it wasn't marketed very well either, you know. So I think like this weird like comedy fantasy tone, you know, it's not quite King Arthur or something like that's like an action movie, and it's not quite a comedy, you know.
Yeah, and it's called The Princess Bride. Right.
Yeah, which they address pretty early on in the movie because like that little boy, Fred Savage, you know, and you as a middle schooler was like, I don't want to watch a movie called The Princess Bride about kissing about romance and things I'm not interested in.
Yeah, those are two things I'm not interested in: princesses and brides. Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. So I can understand why it would have been like really hard to market this movie back in the day.
Yeah, I feel like if we got this movie today, it would be a little bit more meta, like it would comment on itself, and then it would also, I feel like it might be a little bit more cynical too. I feel like the children's movies that we get that are along this line end up being a little bit more cynical or like trying to appease parents as well. Yeah, that's just my feeling on what it would be like today.
Yeah, I think meta humor is a little bit, or can be like kitschy and kind of fall in and out of fashion. And so I think that, you know, the right way to approach a story is to let the story be a story, right? Like the movie within the movie, just let it be and let it be genuine. And that's one thing that I love that they do in here. And we can kind of talk about the framework if you guys want.
Sure. It's
such a smart way to frame the film. And I haven't read the actual Princess Bride book. Have you guys?
No. I've only read that William Goldman book where he talks about writing the Princess Bride book.
Yeah,
Which lie
same.
did I tell?
I think that framework was added into the movie. I'm pretty confident in saying that's not part of the book. But I think it's such a good way to give anyone who's not interested in the movie a gateway into it. And I think that goes along with, you know, it being hard to market, you know,
right.
And I think that's something they did to keep people in the seats, because the opening of the film, you know, it has to establish this, you know, once a century sort of romance between Wesley and Buttercup.
Well, the first scene is the grandpa, Peter Falk, trying to sell it to the kid, the audience, you know?
Right.
Like in the very opening scene, he's like, nah, I promise it'll be good, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And then even whenever we get into the actual story, like when it's very warm, it's very passionate and romance. Like it almost reminds me of like sort of like Harlequin romance novels, sort of like look to it. And I think that it works because we get this kid's like interruption, right? To say like, wait a minute, hold on. What is this? And I think like without that, the movie could be very sappy and lose a decent amount of the audience before it even gets started.
Is that being meta? Is that because it's commenting on itself? So was I wrong to say that it wasn't meta?
I don't think it's
the
quite
whole movie.
meta.
The whole movie is kind of an homage to storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I don't know if it qualifies as like what you're considering to be meta.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think meta would be... Go ahead.
I think it's definitely winking.
Yeah.
It's not the story commenting on itself. It's Fred Savage, a second story commenting on the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like the whole character is designed to be that comment on everything that's going on. Whereas like if this were like a Lord and Miller movie, you know...
Right.
There would be all kinds of like references to pop culture and, you know, etc.
That makes sense.
And I do want to say that, you know, I used to think that was why that was there in the movie, was this gateway, and that was kind of it, you know, just this sort of framework. But one thing I just want to point out is this is over the last year since I got the Criterion edition, watching the film, like this is the first time I've watched it since my grandfather has passed away. So there's something that I never quite picked up on when I was watching it when I was younger, right? Like these scenes have a totally different emotional weight to me now. And I kind of picked up more on like their relationship and the relationship between the grandfather and the grandson, and like the arc that they go through, or at least the kid does. And like the relationship, I don't know that it changes with the grandfather, but like how it grows with the grandfather by the end, that like it makes these scenes feel a lot more necessary and a lot more a part of the movie and the overall experience than it did before. So I think that's It's just something I wanted to note.
That's interesting. I mean, to me, they always felt necessary just because I knew how The Princess Bride came into being. William Goldman talks about it in the special features, but he also talks about it in the book, Which Lie Did I Tell, and I'm sure many other places. But this started out as bedtime stories to his daughters. And one wanted a story about a princess, and the other one wanted a story about a bride. So a lot of this was like him winging it, and then going back and rewriting the book to try and capture some of that magic that was in those bedtime stories. And so having Fred Savage being talked to by his grandfather, Peter Falk, keeps the movie in line with how this story came to be in the first place. So it keeps that spirit of how you're supposed to view it intact.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I actually really thought about it that way. I don't know that I've seen the movie since I had read the book.
It is a book. Yeah, this is a bedtime story from the mind of William Goldman to his daughters. It is meant to be ridiculous and fun to make little kids laugh at the ridiculousness of it all. Knowing that is the perfect way to go into this movie, right? And so, to me, I can't imagine the movie without the Fred Savage scenes just because I feel like it would be an incomplete idea.
So this might be a bit of a tangent, I think, but have we all seen the film House, the Japanese film?
House.
I have actually not finished it, no.
Oh, well,
you
you've seen
finished.
part of it.
You stopped in the middle of the movie? How could you stop?
Well, it was like 5 minutes and other stuff popped up, so I couldn't finish it.
5 minutes to go or 5 minutes in?
5 minutes in.
Oh, okay. Well, then maybe you can comment on this. Maybe you can't, but I just wanted to talk about this framework in comparison to House, because House is a very similar story of how the script came to be, is that he wrote the film with his 8-year-old daughter who was giving him all of these ideas and helping him come up with the story. So that's why it's so ridiculous. But House doesn't give you that framework. You just kind of have to know through reading about the film or hearing the director talk about it.
It's like a bizarre fever dream.
Yeah. So I guess, do you think that it would improve something like House to have this framework, or do you think that it's something that works really well just for this particular movie?
Well, do you think
like House? Go on.
Do you think it helps you appreciate the movie better because you knew it was his daughter helping make the film? So when you approach the film for the first time and you don't realize that, did you know that the first time you watched it, I guess is what I should ask.
I mean, no, I didn't know it when I was a little kid, but I think the framing device puts you in that state of mind, right? Of okay, I'm supposed to be viewing this through the eyes of a child. Even if I'm an 80-year-old man, the child is the one imagining this in his brain as the grandpa is reading it. So I think knowing the context improves that. For Princess Bride, I think the framing device definitely does all the work it needs, and then everything you know about how it came to be, I think helps improve it later. With House, there is no framing device like that, but it is a completely crazy fantasy as well. And I think, let me put it this way, if you're trying to make that movie House appeal to mainstream audiences, then yes, you need a scene like that.
Yeah.
If you're fine with it being this crazy niche thing that people who dig the Criterion Collection only are into seeking out and showing their friends who they can convince to sit down for 80 minutes, then I wouldn't trade House for the world because it's so unique and bonkers and weird and fun, but also it will never have a mainstream appeal to it. So I think the framing device of having the story within the story is necessary for the screen medium, for it to be a movie that can be beloved by your grandma as well as your 3-year-old kid,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Let me ask you guys this, though. I mean, the movie holds up pretty well. I think we've all established that we think that. But do you think kids today would be able to latch onto this? Or do you think maybe it's getting to the point where it's just too old?
I think the barrier might be that it's old. But I think if you can get a kid to sit down and watch it and genuinely give it a chance and not let them be on their phone or something that wouldn't let them pay attention, I think it would go over pretty well. And I think that films tend to age less when they're set in a previous time. The film was made in the 80s, but it's set in some unknown time a long time ago.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is always that barrier of something that's old, and you make a movie night out of it, and I think that they'll like it. Yeah, for sure.
I do think the struggle that it might have, and I'm basing this a little bit off of our experience recently watching The Kid Who Would Be King. That I remember you, Chris, said that you had a bunch of kids in your theater that were loving the Merlin character, who is very eccentric and very over the top. And while we might have one or two eccentric characters, depending on your definition of eccentric, in this film, a lot of what they say is pretty like wry humor, and there's nothing like over the top or like no crazy character to be just like entertaining for entertaining's sake, right?
You have a couple of side characters. I think Billy Crystal.
Yeah, he's one that I was thinking of, and
I think
maybe even Wallace Shawn.
Yeah, Wallace Shawn for sure.
Wallace Shawn has like a goofy, cartoonish thing about him in this film that'll keep you going. And then I think Andre the Giant is we see that type of character in cartoons now. You know, like the kind of the slow big guy. So I think that archetype's there. But you can appreciate it more as an adult and hearing the witty banter.
Mandy Patinkin is pretty entertaining as Montoya. I used to like him when I was a kid. I remember that was like the character that I remembered the most.
And I think they have simple wants and needs, right? It's very clear what their wants and needs are. So hopefully a child could latch onto that and they know this is what Mandy Patinkin's character wants, and you can follow that even if he's not wacky and crazy.
Okay, that's fair enough. I'm wondering, you know, and we live in a bit of a different age, and you know, like the YouTube age where what is all the rage is like videos that are a few minutes. But I think you're right. I think it has holding power, especially if you can get them into like a theater setting, where there's not other stuff.
One thing I think that maybe certain things that might not hold up, like, you know, I wish those cliffs had been a little more insane on the cliffs of insanity. You know, it just looked like a normal cliff. Like they didn't have anything like unique about it. So like I think there might be some like letdown when it comes to like the screaming eels or the cliffs of insanity, and then they're not just that much different than like regular things. Right. Well, the eels look pretty good, I guess. Still, they're pretty effective, I guess.
What was the dungeon called? Is something that where they torture Carrie Ulis? It's called like the Pit of Despair, I think.
Pit of Despair, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a theme throughout, like, but it's just a regular dungeon. It's the Pit of Despair.
Yeah. And the swamp fire, the swamp forest, fire swamp. Yeah. So yeah, I think it is a bit of a like you're supposed to have fun with the names, but maybe that's a fair point. How do you think the visual effects and that sort of thing hold up, like the rodents of unusual size and that sort of thing?
You know, they don't, but it's kind of fun to see like the quaint old wrestling a dude in a rat outfit versus like wrestling nothing at all, you know,
like a CG rat.
Yeah. So it's like it's just one bad special effect or the other, you know. It's just an older bad special effect.
Yeah. Well, I think too it works because you're in a sense seeing the vision of like a kid imagining the story as his grandfather's reading it to him.
Right. Yeah, and there's a certain amount of corniness. It's like a Doctor Who, right? Where it's like the villains can purposely look a little corny and bad, and it's kind of all just within like good fun, you know? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's something that it never really crossed my mind to really analyze them very much until I was sitting down making notes of like things we should maybe talk about, and I was wanted to like know what you guys thought, but like I just never analyze them. I think just because it is like someone's vision in their head, so like they can be almost whatever, really.
Right. And I think it's it kind of wears it on its sleeve, you know, the corniness of like the eels and the rats and stuff.
Yeah. Do you guys want to talk about the sword fight? We mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, I actually have that as one of my notes here. I enjoy how basically I enjoy that whole fight. From the whole moment he gets up like on the cliff, and like there seems to be like this honorable samurai back and forth between the two of them, you know?
Yeah.
Like between Montoya and Wesley. Mm-hmm. And like even after the duel, Wesley didn't want to kill such a good swordsman, Montoya, because the world would be lesser for it, because he was such an artist with a sword. Yeah. I enjoy the honorable back and forth between our heroes. You don't really see a lot of that in in movies like that, right? You know what I mean? Like, it seems like a very samurai movie kind of thing to do.
Yeah, and I think it's what really like sets the film up to be so enjoyable and likable, is like giving us these two characters who at the time are supposed to be enemies and gonna fight each other to the death, but like make us love both of them so much in that conversation and make both of them so likable.
Yeah, and you
Like,
can't help but like when that scene is going on, like whenever he's like looking down over the cliff and he's like, "Are you gonna be much longer?" Like, you get the idea that neither one of them really knows why they want to fight the other one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they're just like, "Oh, this guy's following me. I gotta fight him." You know, and like, there's not really any rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah, and they never seem angry or like they never like try to tough talk each other. Like, it's just so like jovial and amicable.
Yeah,
Like,
he's like, "Take a rest. You just been climbing."
yeah, he's like, no,
We'll
let
fight
you
in a
catch your
minute.
breath first, so it'll be fair.
Very Dragon Ball Z of them.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I love the banter between the two of them during the sword fight. And what I find interesting is I read the Cary Elwes As You Wish book that is like, kind of like his story of the making of Princess Bride and a lot of behind the scenes information. And he was talking about in the script that Goldman simply refers to the scene in like one sentence. It's just like the greatest sword fight in modern times, or they have the greatest sword fight in modern times, or something like that, right? And so they struggled. They were like, "Oh wow, we do have to make this the greatest sword fight." So that's why it's like it's so complex, and that's why it's as long as it is too. But like, I think it's a really, really notable achievement to have it be one of the greatest like cinematic sword fights we've ever seen. But it also ends up being the backdrop of the scene, because they're like, the dialogue is so good and the performances are so good while they're doing it, and so like fun to hear their back and forth.
Yeah, they're commenting on like which style the other one's like defending with.
Yeah, which could be boring.
Nah,
but it's
not in the hands of two actors so charming.
Right.
Like, it almost plays out exactly like a Dragon Ball Z fight. Basically, where it's like they start out slow, testing each other, build up, make sure they're both at the top of their game so they can get the proper challenge. And then when it's over, no one wants to hurt each other. Like, mortally, you know?
Right. Well, we know where Dragon Ball Z got it.
Yeah, there you go. No, but overall, I agree with you. It's great, and I think... and it's not even the most flashy sword fight. You know what I mean? It's very understated, but it's very real. It's just a regular fencing fight, you know, like in that style. It's not like a lightsaber fight or like a, you know, this blunt, bloody, brutal thing. It's just very much like a dance. Yeah.
And it's interesting that you bring up a lightsaber fight, because reading the book, I learned that the people who came on to like choreograph the fight and train Cary Elwes and Mandy Patinkin how to fence in general, and also like teach them the choreography. At least one of them, I think, if not both of them, worked on Star Wars films before Princess Bride. So they were also choreographing a lot of the lightsaber battles as well.
Which could be much less impressive due to the production challenges of making a lightsaber in the 80s.
Yeah, definitely.
This fight's more impressive than anything in any of the original Star Wars trilogy, for sure.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons it's more impressive is because it's actually them doing it. And that was one of the things that I found the most interesting in the book, was that like they would train constantly. Like, they trained for like 2 to 3 weeks before the film even started. And every off day they would be training and rehearsing the sword fight. And he even said that in between takes, like if they were like, okay, we got that, let's move to a different setup, and they had about a 15-minute break, the sword trainer would come up and be like, all right, Cary, here's your sword, let's do it. And they would just constantly be training. Cool. And I like hearing that story, because it's like, it's cool to see how much work goes into a film, and cool to see like how well that paid off. You read it and you're like, totally worth it.
Yeah, and I think it's more impressive, especially by today's standards, just because there's so few cuts in the fight. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not like a fight made in editing.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like what you guys said too. So you get this amazing fight sequence, but the witty banter that's going back and forth engages you just as much, if not more, than the actual sword fight, because the witty banter is so much fun. I mean, like, just an example, like right before they start fighting, Mandy Patinkin's character is like, "You seem a decent fellow, I hate to kill you." And then Cary Elwes says, "You seem a decent fellow, I hate to die." And that it's just the whole thing is full of jokes like that, and they're so great.
Yeah, that is my favorite exchange in the whole movie. Like, that's one of my favorite lines.
Yeah.
I think that's so good.
Because that's the part where you expect him to talk tough, right? But he's like, I hate to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my whole favorite scene in the whole movie, actually, just because it feels like, oh man, did I just step into Yojimbo for a minute, or something cool?
I also want to talk about the Billy Crystal cameo a little bit.
Oh, he's so good in it.
He is so good. And he's one of the things that I worry about the most when I go to rewatch this film, is that like his old Jewish man shtick.
Yeah, just like a Mel Brooks impression.
Yeah. I worry that that's going to wear out with time, but it just stays funny.
What is it that he says when they're leaving, where he's like, have fun storming the castle, or something like that?
Yeah, which is that's such a good line.
Yeah.
It's a good delivery of a line, I guess.
Yeah, don't listen to my delivery,
Right.
It was terrible, but when Billy Crystal does it, it's funny.
But we've all seen the movie, so like you can even say it without the same inflection and same performance, and everybody
you could just
laugh.
pretend it was funny.
Yeah. Supposedly, the only injury that Mandy Patinkin got doing the film, despite all the sword fight and action stuff he's doing, the only injury he got was a bruised rib from laughing at Billy Crystal so hard.
Oh yeah. I also read that he stabbed Christopher Guest.
Yeah. Yes.
In the leg. Because they were like training for their sword fight, and then apparently he like just stabbed him right before they had to do a cut. So Christopher Guest was like, "Don't do that. You're supposed to pretend to stab me."
That's funny. Along those same lines, Christopher Guest, when he hits Wesley over the head right after they come out of the fire swamp to like knock him out and take him to the pit of despair, he wasn't hitting Cary Elwes hard enough. So Cary was like, "Just kind of hit me a little harder," right? And Christopher Guest was really hesitant, and Cary talked him into it. So he hits him hard, and he hit him too hard and actually knocked him out.
Whoa.
Like,
nice.
The even though it's like a really quick cut in the film, that shot that's in there of him doing that is actually Cary Elwes passed out. Like, he wakes up, he was like, I woke up later. And I think in a hospital or something.
Nice. So when I was like looking for some like featurettes on this movie to watch, because full disclosure, I don't have the Criterion disc, so I had to use YouTube for most of my special features. But it seems like no matter what I found, I couldn't find anything where it didn't eventually turn into someone asking about Andre the Giant or talking about Andre the Giant, and just how much of a delight he was to work on this movie.
I've heard all the same things.
Yeah, and it's actually, I guess it is his movie. I mean, he's not the star, but he's like the attraction. You know what I mean? Like, I think he was probably the most famous of any of the actors in there, except for like maybe Billy Crystal at the time. Like, Andre the Giant was huge, well, literally and in pop culture. But anyway, I think it's just really interesting how like everyone just says that he was a complete delight, and he was like happy to be part of the crew because he didn't feel like he was like a sideshow attraction or anything like that. He felt like he was part of the crew, and he took it very seriously.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's sad knowing that not very many years later he would die, but apparently the rest of his life he was really proud of this movie and would like try to show it to people and be like, have you seen my movie?
Oh.
As well he should be too.
And supposedly he was going through lots of like really bad back problems and back issues from like years of wrestling and just his general size. And
yeah,
so to give that performance and to like be a part of like a movie, which like making a movie is no easy task, even if you're not like hauling around equipment and lights and cameras, like if you're an actor, it's still like a brutal task. And especially he does like some fighting and action stuff. So like to do everything that he does and give the performance he does, like in like severe back pain, and still just like hear all those stories that everyone loves him. Like, it's not like he was moping around. He was still like being an amazing person.
Yeah. I kind of get the feeling that he's not really playing a character. He's kind of playing himself in this. And if he's anything like his character, I could see why people would be in love with him and his personality.
Yeah, he's very likable. And I think him and Mandy Patinkin's like relationship, they feel like best friends. And it's so fun to watch like two people who have such like great chemistry together.
I feel like Andre the Giant though has chemistry with pretty much everyone in this movie that he shares any dialogue with, which isn't many people.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's probably just natural from all the reasons we just talked about.
Yeah.
One thing I want to say, I think one of the funniest lines in the film is delivered by Chris Sarandon, who he doesn't get talked about as much. He's the Prince Humperdinck.
Right. Yeah.
Who gives like mostly a pretty serious performance.
Yeah.
And he's supposed to be kind of the bad guy.
Yeah, he gets the least to do in the least gratifying role.
Yeah, definitely. And I just love that he has, like, to me, one of the funniest lines, like, at least on paper in the film. And it's funny when he delivers it, but it's the please consider me as an alternative to suicide.
Oh, yes, that is a good line.
Yeah. When
It's such a good line.
I like when he's like, I'm simply booked or I'm simply swamped. He's like,
yeah,
I've got to go like kill my wife and frame this guy and this. And he's like, I don't have time to do anything.
I've got a wedding to plan, my wife to murder, a country to frame for it.
Yeah. He's like, I'm simply swamped. Pretty great.
I mean, I don't have much else. The only other thing I wanted to ask is, I've never had this before other than these last 2 times that I watched it, but the showdown between Inigo Montoya and the Six-Fingered Man, when Inigo Montoya, Mandy Patinkin, gets up and starts fighting back, and he's just like repeating that line over and over again, the famous, you killed my father, prepare to die line. I got really, really choked up these last 2 times watching that scene, to the point where like a tear came out, and that has never happened to me before. And I don't know if that's my own personal sappiness.
Yeah, not me. It's usually pretty easy to make me tear up at almost anything. Like,
right.
I finished Star Wars Rebels, like the TV show cartoon, like last week. So I haven't been watching very many movies. I cried in the last episode of that movie or cartoon, and I did not expect that to happen to me. So I was like, oh God, this is embarrassing.
Yeah. But Inigo's repeating of that line and killing the Six-Fingered Man does not do that to you then?
No, not yet. But
okay.
There have been plenty of times where I've been like, why are you crying right now? Snap out of it. So I understand that sentiment.
Yeah, definitely. Chris?
Yeah, it didn't work me up to tears. I don't know why. Maybe I don't have the nostalgia that you do for it, but
I think that has something to do with it. Like, I did watch, let me see, what was the last? Oh, I watched How to Train Your Dragon 2 last weekend, and How to Train Your Dragon 1. I watched both of them last weekend, and both of them made me choke up.
Oh,
yeah. At one point.
I absolutely cried during How to Train Your Dragon 2, which I did not expect.
Yeah. It goes to some pretty heavy places, that movie.
Yeah, that's probably a conversation for another time, I guess.
Yeah, like a How to Train Your Dragon themed conversation, more specifically.
Yeah, I think so. End of the day, I guess final thoughts that I have on it. Like, I think one of the things that makes the movie work so well, and what makes it so loved and endearing, is like the amount of love that went into it.
It's earnestness. Yeah.
Because Rob Reiner had the Princess Bride book that was given to him by his father or something like that. Like, I don't know how long before the movie was made, but like he grew up a fan of the book. Carrie Elwes grew up a fan of the book. And I was surprised to read this. I don't remember it from reading the screenwriting Goldman books, but from reading the Carrie Elwes book, is that William Goldman, this was like his favorite thing that he ever wrote was The Princess Bride. Mm-hmm. And he was so attached to it. And there were stories that Carrie Elwes told in the book of like, William Goldman just looked like a nervous wreck during all of pre-production and the beginning parts of production, because he was so worried about how the film would turn out, because he didn't want it to be
ruined.
Bad. Like, he loved it so much. And I think that shows up in every single character, and almost like every line of dialogue just seems so like, none of it seems unnecessary. It all seems so perfect.
Yeah. It's interesting. Whenever I was looking for special features, Rob Reiner was talking about how, he was trying to make this movie. Like, he just got done doing The Sure Thing with John Cusack, and before that, he just got done doing This Is Spinal Tap. Mm-hmm. And so he was like looking for another movie, and like, okay, let's do a book. And The Princess Bride was like his favorite book he'd ever read. So he contacted William Goldman, and he found out that William Goldman had been trying to get this made into a movie for like 15 years, he'd said. With no luck, because like studios kept shutting down, or people kept getting fired, or whatever, right as the movie was about to go into production. So Rob Reiner was like, I want to do it, and so William Goldman apparently went out to go see This Is Spinal Tap with his kids, and loved it, was cracking up at it, and he said, okay, give this guy The Princess Bride. So Carl Reiner thinks that it was, his comedic chops in This Is Spinal Tap that got him this movie, combined with also his other film he'd done, which was The Sure Thing. So it showed that he could be like sweet, and do like a love story, and also be comedic.
Yeah. It's like kind of this fabled Hollywood story of a film not being able to get made, and it was like on the table so many times and attached to so many different directors. I think Robert Redford was one.
Yeah, they literally said that like the weekend they were about to start shooting the movie, the head of the studio got fired.
Oh wow.
And then like they financed it again, and then the money just ran out, and like it was like 3 or 4 different times of him like getting all the ducks in the row to make the movie, and then something beyond their control happens. Like I think one time he said like the first time like the entire studio that was going to make it shut down.
Right.
So it was just like production hell for like a decade.
Yeah, and he kept having to buy the rights back from the studios when this would happen.
That sucks.
Because he wanted it to like still get made.
Yeah. William Goldman was the man.
I do think it's one of those happy accidents that, you know, like the casting all worked out the way it did.
Well, it was like the perfect storm.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody was perfect for the parts that they got cast, and the director was right, and it all worked out really well, I think, in the end.
Yeah. Funny, that actually reminds me of one more story. I keep bringing up the book, but I'm going to bring it up one more time. Wallace Shawn, when he was cast for Vizzini, when he was contacted, I think it was his agent or someone who had contacted him was like, hey, Rob Reiner's doing this film, The Princess Bride, and he wants you to come out, like, audition for the role or whatever. And whoever it was told him that he wanted Danny DeVito, but Danny DeVito can't do it, so now he needs someone to step in. So Wallace Shawn was just completely self-conscious and hated his, like, everything he was doing, because he was always imagining how Danny DeVito would do it and thought that like, he couldn't live up to Danny DeVito. And like throughout the book, there's little like inserts from like other people and everything when they're talking about that. And like every Wallace Shawn bit is like talking about how he's comparing himself to Danny DeVito and how he thinks he would have been better. Guy. And he isn't a big fan of his performance.
I think he's good.
I think his character very likely could have been too much. Like, because he's always yelling and screaming at the guys, and it could be that character that kind of grates on you, but he like walks that line really well, and it never gets to be too much, and he nails it, really.
I agree. Though that said, I think Danny DeVito would have killed it.
I think it would have been good too. Yeah.
I would not want anyone else besides Wallace Shawn in this movie. In fact, I could use a little more Wallace Shawn in more movies, to be honest with you.
I know. I love his cameo in BoJack Horseman, where he's like he's supposed to play BoJack Horseman in a movie.
Yeah. I also like it's not a cameo, but it's just his part in Incredibles.
Well, who is he in Incredibles?
Is he not the boss? Mr. Incredible's boss at the insurance company, where he's like, let's hope we don't insure them.
Probably so. I think just when I saw The Incredibles, I might not have been as familiar.
That voice, how can you forget it?
Yeah,
but
it's
then
also
again,
been
I'm going to
forever.
look an ass if it's not him and someone writes in. I'm not going to Google it.
Take the risk, yeah. All right, so I think that does it for our discussion on The Princess Bride, unless anyone has anything else they want to add.
It was The Incredibles. I lied. I did Google it. But no, I'm done with I'm done, not The Incredibles. I'm done with Princess Bride.
Are we talking about The Incredibles?
Oh, crap. What movie are we doing? Damn it. I think we need to re-record, guys.
Oops. So with that, I guess we can move into our next poll choices.
All right. So here we are choosing our next picks for our next Casually Criterion episode. The winner of the poll will be the movie we review next month in March of 2019.
Chris, why don't you tell us what this month's theme is?
Yeah, so lately I've been watching a documentary called The Story of Film and Odyssey. It's on Hulu for anybody that wants to watch it. I really recommend it. It's a really great comprehensive story of the history of film. But I was going through the first episodes and they were covering silent films. And I realized that we haven't covered a silent film on here. And in fact, I'm woefully behind on silent films in general. So I wanted to pick silent films, and I asked you guys, and you said okay. So that's how we got here.
Lovely story.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, the story film's so good, and I think it's worth mentioning too, just because, like, really quick, that like Stanley Donen passed away this weekend,
yeah.
And he's in that a lot, talking about the early days of film and the golden age of filmmaking when he was involved in, like, even before he was a director. So, like, another reason to watch that documentary.
Yeah, Stanley Donen is in it a lot. That's actually where I kind of got to know him, to be honest. So yeah,
Cool.
definitely
Anyways.
worth watching.
All right. So who wants to go first with their pick?
I'll go first. So I am picking a film from 1929, directed by George Wilhelm Pabst, and starring the Louise Brooks. And that movie is Pandora's Box, which is,
Nice.
according to I know, right? I haven't seen this movie but one time. I'm looking for a reason to watch it again, and this is my opportunity, so don't let me down, voters. The IMDb synopsis, if I need to sell it a little more, is the rise and inevitable fall of an amoral but naive young woman whose insouciant eroticism inspires lust and violence in those around her. Which sounds kind of sexist now that I'm thinking about it from like a 2019 lens, just as a plot. But I'm anxious to rewatch it and see if who the movie really focuses on. It's been a long time since I've seen it.
Yeah, it's been forever since I've seen it as well. It's one I've also only seen once. And again, I would like to watch it again. So if it wins, I'm not going to be upset, even if it means I lose.
Yeah, indeed. So that is Pandora's Box, 1929. It is a drama starring Louise Brooks, who made The Bob famous. What'd you pick, Justin?
So for mine, I'm going to go with a film that I've also only seen once and just really want to watch again because I really enjoyed it the first time, and actually got this as like a birthday present from my fiance, who was my girlfriend at the time, and I haven't watched it. So it's this like unopened, never watched Criterion Blu-ray disc sitting on my shelf, and that is Safety Last, which is from 1923.
Nice.
Yeah. It's credited as being directed by Fred C. Newmeyer and Sam Taylor, but Harold Lloyd is the star of it. He's like the third silent comedian alongside Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. He's a little bit lesser known, unless you're into film. But I think a lot of the film's greatness and what's so good about the film is attributed to Harold Lloyd being like a comic genius, much like Chaplin and Keaton's films
and
are.
a crazy daredevil like the other two.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So the IMDb synopsis isn't very thorough. I don't totally remember what it's about because it's been a long time since I've seen it, but the IMDb synopsis says a store clerk organizes a publicity stunt in which a friend climbs the outside of a tall building, which is a very simple plot.
Yeah. You could do that back then.
Yeah. And I think that the film is really funny. I've seen some of the set pieces in it. So like if you want to laugh, if you want to have a good time, if you want us to laugh and have a good time, vote for Safety Last from Harold Lloyd.
And that's really what I'm concerned with.
All right. So Chris, what is your choice?
So I kind of went off the reservation on this one. This isn't a Criterion, although it's the same company. It's from Eclipse. We watched Tokyo Story recently, and I loved it. And so I wanted to watch some more Ozu. And really, the fact that this movie even exists to this day is a small miracle in itself, given World War II and the fire bombings, and that film was made of nitrate back then. It's a film called I Was Born But... ... And the IMDb synopsis is two young brothers throw a tantrum when they discover that their father isn't the most important man in his workplace. So, family drama that we come to expect from Ozu. I would like to see how he starts off. So that is my pick. And I want to just do an Ozu year where that's all we watch. But so vote for this one is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I've seen the clips of that's in that story of film one in it, and they certainly looked good and interesting. So, yeah, I'm in on that one, and obviously it's a pretty obscure one, so it might be nice to have the reason to sit down and watch that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just the fact that it exists to me is so spectacular that that's almost reason enough to watch it, even if it's the worst movie. The fact that it's this piece of history from Japan that doesn't necessarily, you can't really get anywhere else, is pretty remarkable to me.
When was it made?
1932.
Okay.
Nice.
So, and Justin, when was yours made?
1923.
Okay, so yours is almost 100 years coming up.
A
few years.
It's 96 right now.
Yeah, Pandora's Box was 1929, which is 90 years.
90 years old, yeah.
And right before we started going sound, so it's in a sense, maybe the peak of the silent film.
Yeah, I think Pandora's Box was even made after some sound had been implemented, I believe.
Yeah, and Ozu's definitely was at 1932, but you know, I don't know if that technology or that process had come to Japan yet.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting.
I'm sure.
I suppose if we review it, we'll have
to
figure that out.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Okay, so go vote in the poll, and again, just to recap, the choices are Pandora's Box, Safety Last, and I Was Born But. So go vote in the polls. You can vote for those on our social media pages, which are all at Casual Cinecast.
That does it for me.
Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. And of course, as always, thank you, Jake Wagner-Russell, for doing our intro and outro music. If you want to hear more of his music, you can do so at soundcloud.com/bopscotch.
All right, guys. So stay tuned to this channel. Our next episode are going to be the Casual Cinecast Awards. And we'll also be talking about the Oscars, the wins, the losses, the snubs, whatever, everything in between, the ceremony, what we thought. So join us.
Yeah, Casual Cinecast Awards, otherwise known as the Casualties.
Yeah, Chris is really pushing for the casualties, so I guess we're calling it the Casualties.
That's so silly that I love it.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.